Alright, I'm back in the shop. Gonna start looking at my exhaust routing for the left side here. I think first thing I got to do is take the shift linkage off here. Okay. Next step is to measure the approximate length of my pipe. And gonna have to run over top of the primary here. Start about here somewhere. So that's 1 foot to this corner here. So I'll hold that. I gotta account for spacing everything too. Run this out to about here. Let's see. Bend in. Maybe it's about 22 inches to there. Just gotta get an idea how long of a piece of pipe I need to start with. I cut a piece of pipe 42 inches. Okay, I cut my pipe 42 inches long. Next, I'm going to measure about 28, maybe 30 inches onto the pipe. This way I know kind of where the point is in the engine area. Definitely got a bit of space in there. Not tons and tons, but it's actually not too bad. First thing I really need to do is I need to cut a wedge shape out of the pipe so I can kind of kink it and sort of put my first bend into it. So I have one of these fancy angle gauges here. It's got to be about there somewhere. It almost looks like the right angle. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make basically like a template almost. I think it's going to be the easiest way to figure out all my bends, because I'm just going to use this straight pipe and cut wedge shapes out and kind of make my bends that way incrementally. This pipe is 1 3/4 outside diameter. So I have this crappy box here. I'm just going to basically cut some 1 3/4 inch strips here. Cut this here like that, this like that. Can overlap those now. Put a screw in there. Now see, that way when that's straight, that gap there is pretty much closed. So this way I can match my angle on my fancy angle finder thing. Okay. I measure this gap here. Looks like a 1/2 inch exactly, pretty much. So that tells me on my pipe, right about here, I've got to take 1/2 inch off. I just want to basically trace this line around as best as I can to the top. You just want your wedge to be centered. So my plan is to cut that wedge out all the way down to about here and just leave like a sliver of pipe on there, so I can then kind of fold the pipe like this, close this gap in here, and then put a tack weld right there. I'm going to go through the whole pipe like that, step by step, one bend at a time. Okay, so I'm just going to kind of match these measurements around. Simply just wrap it carefully, making sure to stay square on the metal. You just got to hold it tight there. The important one is down here, and put a mark right there in the center. And then exactly 180 degrees from that mark is our top dead center, if you will. It's important to get this stuff fairly even because if you're off a little bit this way or that way, you'll actually have like not just a straight bend, but it'll bend over to one side. That in the vise with our top center. We'll be cutting these at an angle, but to get started, you got to be square with your pipe. Once you have a good notch in there, you can angle it to line up with your mark. And then you basically just go to the other back side of it or underside until you sort of bottom out on that, and then you stop. And you want these cuts to zero out on each other down here. There we go. I've got too thick of a spot in there still, that backbone too wide. So I'm just gonna literally run my saw through here and just remove some of that material. You don't want to have a big flat area on the back of your pipe there where the bend is. You want about a 1/4 inch width. You also want to make these even. You don't want to just take the width off one side. In a way, you're better off doing some of this with a hacksaw anyway, because you can really get it fine-tuned. That just bends like that. Tack weld that just so it stays kind of where it should. First, I'm going to check it against my angle finder and just make sure that it's fairly close to where I wanted it. It looks pretty darn close. Oops. I got my heat cranked up all the way still from welding my frame. Let's try that again. Much better. I'm going to try and fill this. Ooh, fire. It's not good. That is not good at all. That's exciting though, isn't it? I don't want to set my garage on fire because it's kind of attached to my house. So there you have it. So you see how, I mean, it's like a kink bend. I actually, I've seen a few bikes with exhaust built like this, sort of rat rod bikes, and I kind of think it looks cool. It's not like fancy mandrel bends, but if you have a sharper bend to do than this, like a 90 or even a 45 or something, it works really well if you do like 3 or 4 cuts and then it's more gradual, but it's still kind of incremental like this. I'm gonna go each step of the way, one weld at a time, like this, and kind of just tack each of them. And that way, if I have to change something, I only have a tack weld to cut through. Now we'll see how it fits. That looks like it should work pretty well. What I need is some wood to block this with. Wedges are very handy for this sort of work because you can kind of slide it in to where you need it. I'll make sure I got enough clearance on the other side too. Now usually I would leave the battery in a project like this and short it out a whole bunch of times by putting tools down on it. Usually how I roll. I want the pipe to be the proper angle on this side because it's got to come up in a U shape and tie into the head there. We have to start to angle up and out and this way too. There. We kind of need a spiral bend almost so it comes up and back at the same time. This is kind of the inside right here. This is going to be really tricky to do, and I'm going to have to math out how much width I need on each cut. And I'm probably going to have to kind of do one at a time. Once I get past here and up to here, it's like one bend, two bends, three, and then I got to put a 90 in down below here. Let me get that out. Okay, so I think my 90 here, according to my math, I'm pretty sure each of these 4 cuts will have to be about 5/16 of an inch, 3/8 of an inch, somewhere in there. First thing I got to do is mark out the top of each of these. There, 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 there. And then go to the other side, exactly 180, and I think if I had something to wrap around that, it'd be a lot easier. I guess I could do math. I'm not good at math though. I know the circumference of the diameter, I think, is 314, but that's about all I know. Maybe it's radius times 3.14. I don't remember. I'm going to do it this way. That's my diameter. So now I basically cut this in half. Cut it in half, it'll actually kind of cover exactly from the top to the bottom. I'm going to put an arrow like that. So I'll remember it goes there. This wraps around to there, and that should be the exact opposite side. So that's where my cut has to taper to nothing. Okay, so as I say, this will now cover exactly from the top to exactly the bottom. I put a mark there already. So I think this cut has got to be, I think each of these have got to be about 3/8 of an inch. I'm going to start back here. So I'm going to wrap this around from point A to point B, kind of right on my center, just because. Put a mark here. That's where it's got to taper to 0. And so now I've got those. I have my center marks on here. So I'll go about 3/8 of an inch from the center, which is about here. Okay, and those will taper to 0 on the bottom. Kind of eyeball it. I should have put a center mark on there. No, that's not gonna be right. 3/8 being in the center. About there. Tricky to do for sure. I guess I could just do that. That's a little easier. The thing doing this kind of stuff is that unless you've actually done it a whole bunch, you're not going to be really good at it. You're going to basically be good at it by the time you're done. And then by the next time you do it, you'll probably have forgotten everything. It's how it works out for me all the time. I have to kind of relearn everything every single time I do a job. A business card would actually work perfectly for this. There. It's not that big of a deal if those line up perfectly there, because when you're sawing this with a hacksaw, you're only able to really see this side. You just line up your top of your blade and kind of go on one side, And the other side, if your saw is fairly straight in there, it'll be the same. So now we'll put our top mark right on the top, facing up in our vise. That way with our hacksaw, it'll sort of line up fairly well, hopefully. What I'm doing is I am lining up my saw blade visually with my cut line. You can see right in there, right there, you can kind of see that edge lined up. So that's all I'm basically doing once I start angling the saw. You want to keep your saw square with the pipe too. You don't want it off at an angle. So that way your cut is nice and square. And if you have your center line facing perfectly up and not to the side either way, if you keep your saw blade flat, it'll end up right on that bottom line there. And that's why we get that top line perfectly straight up in the air, not at an angle. So from the angle I'm at here, where you could see the line lined up this way with the cut line that we put on, you can also use your eye to square this up here. And that's how you keep your saw square that way. You do want that bottom to be perfectly on the other side of your top mark, because otherwise what happens when you bend this, it'll naturally bend where that where the together part is in the bottom. It'll just bend there instead of up where your top mark was. It's not going to care where your top mark used to be. It's going to bend where it wants to bend. So it's all about how accurate your cuts are. And like I say, this might not even work. I might have to scrap this piece or fill it in, change the angles. I will find out when I put it in there. All right. I think we're ready to fit that. Let's see how this fits, or if it does. Okay, not quite 90. Could angle up in here more. Either that, or it's really got an angle here, like a lot. So I think the upward angle is just fine. I think it's the last two that could get tightened up, so I could take more material out of here and out of here. So I will attempt to do that. That's kind of a little easier with a grinder, I think, but I should be able to do it with the hacksaw. just tack weld that. Little dabble do ya. Let's see how it fits. Okay, getting there. It's looking like it'll fit, sort of. So that's the fit so far. Three-quarters of an inch. Right there. Paper. 3/4 of an inch. 6/8. That's 3/4 of an inch. What I'm doing is I'm going from that line to the 0 out center line on the bottom. You can already tell this is going to be off a little bit. These cuts aren't perfectly even with each other, so I have to try and make them. Otherwise I'll have a step in there one way or the other. This way, this cut's more sloped than this one is. I'll have a step. This side will end up higher right here. So now is one of those times when you just have to ignore your line and basically try and eyeball it symmetrical with the other so it's a perfect V shape. Wrong angle. So I got that at the wrong angle. So now, hang on, cutting this lump off of here. I got the angle wrong and it cut out too soon. And so I got to cut the that little bit of excess off. It's about a 90 now altogether. Pretty darn good so far. This could actually be bent a little more, I think. Center on there, which was somewhere. Okay. 1/4 inch right about there somewhere. Okay. Starting to look like something. Because this has to be spaced out here. That's more important, not wrecking my solenoid with the heat. That's why they never made dual exhaust for these early Heritage models, because there's just not enough clearance anywhere. And aftermarket, I'm not sure if you can get any aftermarket dual exhaust. Maybe at one point you could, but you know, for the few people that want to put it on that have a pre-89 Heritage, there's not much of a market there, I don't think, for dual exhaust for these. It's basically an inch. right there, an inch. I'm gonna mark this real quick. Never have tools when I need them. So I'm actually gonna do a couple of 1/2 inch cuts. And then the top is right about here. That's what the crazy looking lines look like for the double 1/2 inch notches I got to cut. Basically a 90, or roughly like a 1 inch relief or cutout or whatever. I'm gonna start cutting these and see where that goes. Oh, this is backwards. It's got to be on the bottom. I'm going to tack weld that back together then. Not a big deal. Not a big deal. Okay, now it's twice as confusing looking. I'm going to fold that up when I have the welder going, because as soon as I move that, it's going to snap somewhere. I know it. Might have to take some of the gap out of the back there. We'll just cut that back there and butt it up together and weld it. Okay, so I fit it again. This curve is a bit too sharp, so I'm going to cut these backs out of here and tighten that up and weld it all together. That'll close those gaps in too at the same time and make it a lot easier to weld this when I finish it. Okay, this is what I have so far for fitment. So next I need to figure out this angle here. Oh, looks fairly good too. That's what I got to figure out next. Figure out the amount of material I got to cut off. Something I've found out doing this is that to get an 1.5 inch gap, like on your template, right? So that's an 1.5 inch gap in there. And so to get that same thing on the pipe, you actually have to cut roughly twice that amount out of the bottom side. I did 2 cuts, 3/4 inch wide, and I'm going to have to do at least one more. Well, this is it so far. I'd say that's turning out pretty darn good. Gaps are all nice and even. This is all probably, hopefully, enough clearance. And I kind of mocked up my floorboards that my dad gave back to me. So got some issues with this one though because of the weird bracket on the shift side here. So this bolt doesn't really go in very well, and it doesn't fold up. So like the other ones though, they have a notch out here so it can actually fold up. I'm not sure. I don't know if there's other brackets for that. It's kind of a funny setup. Like the other side has got both forged pieces coming off of the frame like that, so I think it kind of looks a little nicer, but it is what it is. So, but I'm pretty happy with the exhaust so far. I might straighten this out here, cut this whole thing off, reshape this side, and just kind of re-angle it somehow, cut this whole section out maybe, and just, you know, even if I put almost a straight piece in. That's it so far. Now the real test is going to be if I can take it out from the other side. If I can't pull it all out from the right side of the bike, what I'll do is I will, because this has to come up, this is actually going to be the hardest part about this whole job. I got to angle it this way and then make basically a U like that. If worse comes to worse though, I'm just going to have it separated here somewhere and put or over on the other side maybe. I'll just have a coupler in there somewhere on the other side, and you can pull this part out and pull that part out from that side if you need to.